In 1997, I was standing by the track gate stopwatch in hand, waiting for Amy to round her final lap. But the seconds kept ticking, and the curve stayed empty. No footsteps, no sound. Just wind moving through the cottonwoods like it was trying to whisper something I couldn't hear. That was the first moment something didn't sit right. Not fear exactly, just absence. Like someone had left the door open and the silence spilled in. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from down in the comments and tap that like and subscribe if stories like this ever brushed past your hometown or your own life. Every click helps pull another forgotten name back into the light. My name's Dana Whitlow. I'm 47 now, and I still coach girls track at Silver Hollow High. Back then, I was just a few years out of college, helping with community events, staying close to the trail community that raised me. That summer, everything felt easy. You could run 5 miles before breakfast and not pass another soul. We trusted our neighbors. We didn't lock doors unless we were out of town for a week. Silver Hollow wasn't big, but it held people who showed up for each other. Amy Halterman was one of those people. I knew her from college, brilliant, focused, ran like her soul was chasing daylight. She still held the state university record in the 3,000 meters. Even after graduation, she didn't slow down. Married Jack in '96, he was one of those mountain types, calm and capable, spent more time clinging to cliffs than walking on sidewalks. They were the kind of couple folks talked about like folklore, a runner and a climber building a life right at the edge of wilderness. Amy had this fire in her. Not loud, not showy, just steady. Like she carried purpose in her bones. She was working part-time at Wild Ridge Outfitters and planning a 10K trail race that summer. Something special that would end at Fry Lake with a jump in the water. She wanted runners to earn their cool down. Thursday, July 24th started hot, over 90 degrees before noon. Amy was up early like always. She had a list on her counter, 13 small things to check off before her scouting run. Stop by Shutterstop, swing by Canyon View Studio to talk to Tom about framing prep some flyers. She told her mom she wasn't making the drive to Powell that day after all too much to get done in Silver Hollow. She showed up to Marvin Skelly's weightlifting class around noon, teaching the local kids like she always did. No one noticed anything odd, said she was in a good mood, laughing, focused. She dropped by the studio around 2:30 p.m., checked her watch, said she had to run, literally. That was the last confirmed sighting. At the time, Jack was out near the state line with a buddy scouting climbing routes. They were off-grid. No cell service back then, not even close. The plan was simple, meet back home around dinner. But by 4:30, he was already back, rain having chased them off the rocks. He fed their dog unpacked gear and waited, and waited. It wasn't until almost 11 p.m. that Amy's car was found sitting quiet at the Burnt Gulch trailhead. Unlocked. Keys on the seat. 4 items crossed off the list. No wallet. Sunglasses folded neatly next to the gear shift. And Amy was nowhere. I didn't know any of that yet. Not that night. All I knew was that she hadn't called. And Amy, she always called. The next morning, I got up early, same as always. Made my coffee, pulled on a windbreaker, and headed out to mark the course trail Amy and I had talked about just a week before. She'd mentioned wanting the 10K to be scenic, but tough, somewhere between rewarding and punishing. That was Amy. She didn't believe in coasting. When I got back to the house around 8:30, I saw the missed call light blinking on the landline. It was Jack. His voice was calm at first, maybe a little tired. He asked if I'd seen Amy the day before. I said no, but even before I got the words out, I could feel something start to twist in my chest. He told me she hadn't come home, said her car had been found up at Burnt Gulch by the Skinners just after midnight. They were their landlord's good people, and when they'd heard Amy was missing, they'd taken it upon themselves to drive the loop road. That stretch runs about 30 miles through Shoshone National Forest, not the kind of place you wind up by accident. Her white Toyota was parked neat as a pin off the gravel shoulder just past the switchbacks. The driver's side door was unlocked. Keys were sitting on the passenger seat right on top of a folded piece of notebook paper, Amy's to-do list. 4 items checked off, 9 still open, sunglasses beside it, lenses up. Her wallet, the little green nylon one with the Velcro flap, wasn't in the car. Jack said that's what threw him. Amy never took that thing on runs, said it bounced too much. But the sunglasses, those she wore everywhere, that detail stayed with me. By 10 that morning, word had spread through Silver Hollow like smoke under a door. Marvin Skelly shut down the fitness center. Half the regulars grabbed hiking boots and headed straight to the trailhead. The sheriff's office sent deputies, then search and rescue, and by early afternoon, the state had activated a full search grid. Helicopters with heat sensors sent dogs, horses, volunteers with radios, more people than I'd ever seen out in those woods at once. They started with a 5-mile radius and kept expanding. 20 miles, then 30. The Wind River Range doesn't give up much. It's high, rugged, uneven terrain with fast-changing weather and too many places to disappear. But they searched like she was their own. For days, nothing. Not a thread of clothing, no torn shoelace, no drag marks. Nothing that told us where she'd gone. And that was what scared us most. If it had been an accident, a slip-on scree, a twisted ankle off a ridge, we'd have found something. Amy wasn't careless. She knew those trails better than some of the rangers. I kept thinking about the way she used to time her strides by the curve of the path, how she'd count rocks between switchbacks. She was careful, intentional, so when nothing turned up, not even a scent trail for the dogs to follow, the air shifted. Quietly at first. The official line didn't change, but you could hear it in how people spoke, fewer ifs, more maybe somes. By the 5th day, the National Guard was called in. They brought in equipment from out of state, infrared, thermal imaging, all of it. Still nothing. The sheriff gave a press conference that Friday, flanked by 2 state officials. He thanked the volunteers, promised they'd keep going. Said if she's out there, we'll find her. But the word if hung in the air too long. That night, I saw Tyler Reed, Amy's brother, standing off the road with a pair of binoculars around his neck. He was staring up at the ridgeline like he could will her into view. Tyler wasn't much of a talker before all this, but something in him seemed to settle that night like he'd decided he wouldn't stop looking no matter what the rest of us did. The formal search was called off on the 8th day. After that, it was a criminal investigation. The sheriff brought in a special task force. FBI agents arrived from Cheyenne. Jack offered to keep helping with search teams, putting up flyers, knocking on doors. I remember he printed out new maps and marked them by hand, color-coded with his own system, but people had started to look at him sideways. It was subtle at first, more questions about where he'd been that afternoon, what time exactly he got back. He said he left Dubois around 3 when the weather turned, got home around 4:30. Phone records backed it up. He'd called the hospital at 4:43 to check if Amy had been brought in, but that call couldn't be verified by staff. The number showed up, but no one remembered answering. That bothered some folks. Not because it proved anything, but because it didn't. The state brought in cadaver dogs. They swept Jack's truck, the house, even the climbing gear in his garage. Nothing. They sprayed luminol, checked for blood. Still nothing. Then came the search warrant. Investigators pulled his journals from a box in the attic. Most were typical stuff: trip notes, packing lists, some half-written poetry. But there were entries that stopped people cold. Dark things. Fragments about control, about power. Lines about silencing and stillness. His lawyer said they were lyrics from a band Jack was in back in high school. Maybe they were, but they read wrong. And once people saw those pages, they couldn't unsee them. That's when it split the town. Some believed he was being railroaded, scapegoated, because grief needed somewhere to land. Others couldn't look him in the eye anymore. I watched friendships fall apart at gas stations and grocery aisles. You couldn't say Amy's name without choosing a side. What still gets me is how fast certainty dried up. One day, we were sure she'd twisted her ankle and waited somewhere to be found. The next, we were whispering theories about motive and opportunity. There was no blood, no confession, no trail. Just a girl with running shoes and a list. Just a husband who wouldn't take a polygraph. Just a trailhead in the pines and a silence that grew deeper the longer we listened. That silence held until one night when I picked up the phone to find Tyler on the other end. His voice was flat, but I could hear the edges. He said someone had called the sheriff's tip line. A man from Riverton. Said his brother had been camping in the Burnt Gulch area the same week Amy disappeared. Said his name was Dale Eaton. Tyler asked me if I remembered him. I didn't, but I would. I didn't recognize the name at first, Dale Eaton. Tyler said it like it should have meant something to me. All I remembered was that early tip called in from Riverton just days after Amy went missing. Back then, the sheriff's office had dismissed it. A man claiming his brother had been camping up near Burnt Gulch during the exact week she vanished. Said he liked to fish and kept to himself. But no one followed up. The assumption was that the call was a reward chaser. The posted amount had just climbed past $100,000. People were calling in all kinds of nonsense, and the ones working the case had already set their sights on someone much closer, Jack. By that point, the investigation had fully narrowed around him. And when I say narrowed, I mean tunneled. The FBI had set up shop in a back office at the Wynn County Sheriff's Department, a dozen agents sorting through maps, rewatching footage, cross-referencing phone records. Every move Jack made was being picked apart. There were gaps, sure. Nothing damning, but enough to raise questions. A receipt from a hardware store in Dubois. A hammer, they said. But the clerk didn't remember seeing him. Jack claimed he bought it with a friend, Sam Holter, a travel writer who'd come down from Jackson to climb with him that day. Sam backed up the timeline, said they drove the switchbacks together, and called it off early because of the rain. But no third-party sightings ever placed them on the road at the trailhead, or even in town. Just their word against the silence. Then came the polygraph request. Jack refused. Not angrily, just firmly. Said they were junk science. His lawyer, a man named Clark Spence from Casper, agreed. Told the press those machines were traps designed to punish people who'd already lost everything. If you need a test to trust me, Jack said, then maybe you never really did. It didn't sit well with Tyler. He asked Jack privately twice to take the test just for peace of mind, but Jack held the line. Said if anyone needed a machine to tell them who he was, they didn't know him at all. That's when things started to shift quietly, then all at once. I remember sitting at the bakery with two teachers from the high school. One leaned in and said, "You know, I always thought there was something off about the way he talked about her." The other nodded. Too clinical, like he was describing a student project, not his wife. That's how it started, small cracks in the public face. And once that doubt was out there, it spread fast. The same man who led volunteer search parties, who'd stapled missing posters to every trailhead board from here to Yellowstone, was now being talked about in hushed tones at the post office. People couldn't decide if he was stoic or calculating. Then came the journals. That was the day the lines were drawn for good. During the second warrant search, deputies found a sealed plastic tub in the attic crawl space. Inside were old notebooks, black covers, spiral bindings, the kind you'd find in a college bookstore. Some were climbing logs, others read like song lyrics or poems, but a few pages. Those were different. There were fragments, unfinished thoughts about possession, about fear, about silencing women. Not names, not events, just tone. And once the press got wind of it, they didn't hold back. Murder fantasies found in husband's writings. That was the headline that Sunday. The reporters didn't care if they were written 10 years before Amy. Context didn't matter. Not when a pretty young woman had vanished and the town needed someone to blame. Jack said those were lyrics from a punk band he played in back in high school. He even named the group Sewer Light and gave them tapes. Claimed the lyrics matched. Some did. Others didn't. But by then, the damage had already settled in. I remember Todd Skinner, Amy, and Jack's old landlord sitting beside me at the town meeting in August. He whispered, "They were the best couple I ever knew. But I don't know what to believe anymore." That's what it felt like everywhere you went. This slow erosion of certainty. No new evidence. Just absence, and everyone projecting into it. The FBI doubled down. They combed satellite imagery first from the US, then from Russia, hoping the Mir space station had caught a glimpse of something that day. They got nothing. Cloud cover. Static. They even brought in NASA analysts to enhance thermal scans from the National Guard choppers. Again, nothing. They tried psychics. One swore Amy was alive, trapped in a cave near Lewis Lake. Teams rappelled down every crevice in that region. Found only stones and spider nests. I watched men and women who'd built careers on logic and structure start to clutch at anything that even hinted at movement. Because the hardest part wasn't just that she was missing it, was that she had disappeared without leaving anything behind. No noise, no struggle, just gone. That's why the call about Dale Eaton had felt irrelevant at the time, why it got tossed in with the rest of the noise. The reward hotline had been lighting up day and night. Everything from, "I saw a woman in Salt Lake who looked just like her," to, "I had a dream she was buried under an old lodge." Investigators followed up on dozens of leads. I even drove with Tyler out to a barn in Pavilion after someone claimed they heard a scream there one night. Turned out to be a generator backfiring. Every time we thought we had something, it slipped out of reach. It wore people down. By the time fall came, we were all quieter, less sure of each other. And Jack, he withdrew. Said less, smiled less, took longer to return calls. Some thought that made him look guilty. Others thought it made him look exhausted. But the strange thing is, through all of it, he never left Silver Hollow, never tried to disappear. Stayed in the same cottage, walked the same trail to the gear shop, nodded at the same clerks who now looked away when he passed. He never once tried to clear his name in the papers. He just stayed. Which in its own way only made people more unsure. A guilty man would run, but so would an innocent man who'd been turned into a suspect. Jack didn't do either. He just lived with the silence. And that silence, the vacuum where answers should have been kept, pulling everyone into it. It would be years before anyone took a second look at that early tip. The one about Dale, the fisherman in the woods. The one who'd been camping near Burnt Gulch when Amy vanished. The man whose own brother had tried to warn us. But by the time we finally turned that way, it was no longer a missing persons case. It had become something colder. Something that waited. After that first fall passed without Amy, the town settled into something that looked like normal, but didn't feel like it. The posters came down slowly, not because people stopped caring, but because the wind and sun stripped them down until only the staples were left. Jack kept to himself. He still ran sometimes, always alone, always early. He'd be gone before sunrise, back before town opened. Folks who saw him said he looked thinner, quieter. I think that's what made it harder he didn't disappear. He stayed, walked the same aisles at the market, used the same gas pump, nodded at the same neighbors who didn't know how to meet his eyes anymore. It was like watching someone walk underwater. Everything slowed, muffled, and far away. Tyler never really stopped. Not in the way people expected grief to look. He got quieter too, but there was an edge to it, like he was storing something. He'd show up at my porch in the evening sometimes with folders, sometimes just with a name scribbled on the back of an envelope. Every once in a while, I'd ride with him out to a lead. A cabin someone swore had a light on when it shouldn't, or a tip from someone who thought they saw her in New Mexico. One woman claimed she saw Amy waiting tables in a diner off I-70. Tyler drove straight through the night, walked in with a photo. It wasn't her. The waitress was kind about it, said sorry in a way that made it worse. The hardest part about a long silence is that people fill it with whatever makes the most sense to them. Some clung to the idea of Jack's guilt. Others blamed the terrain, said the forest took her. Some tried to stitch together stranger stories, maybe a stalker, maybe a drifter. That's when the psychics started calling. One said Amy was alive, trapped underground. Another said she saw water, dark water. People wanted to believe any of it because believing nothing was unbearable. I kept a box of clippings in my hall closet, newspaper articles, handouts, maps Tyler had marked. I told myself I kept it in case new details came up. Truth was, I didn't know how to throw any of it away. In 1998, just over a year after Amy vanished, we heard that a man had been arrested outside Dubois, caught violating parole. His name was familiar, though most of us had forgotten where we'd heard it, Dale Eaton. It took Tyler a few days to dig it back up. The man who'd called the hotline in '97, claiming his brother Dale had been camping in Burnt Gulch that summer. The one they hadn't followed up on. Dale had done time for trying to abduct a family broken down along a stretch of highway in the Red Desert. A couple with their 2 kids. He'd pulled up like he was going to help, then tried to force them into his truck. They fought back. He fled. 99 days later, he was out. And now he was in again, picked up not far from where Amy had gone missing. I remember asking Tyler if he thought it was a coincidence. He said he didn't believe in those anymore. We tried to get records. The sheriff's office was quiet about it, said it was unrelated, said they were focusing on the case they had, which was still pointing toward Jack. But something had shifted in Tyler. You could see it in how he spoke slower, steadier. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't speculate. He just started building. That winter, Dale killed his cellmate, beat him in a rage over a stolen tray of food. And then, something else surfaced, DNA. Cold case from '88. A girl named Lisa had gone missing driving through Wyoming. Her body had been found, but the car was gone. Now Dale's DNA had matched. They searched his property in Moneta and found her vehicle buried behind a barn. Along with it, they found women's clothing, purses, news clippings about missing girls, a small collection of horror tucked into the earth. Tyler called me the day the search report went public. He didn't say anything for the first 30 seconds, just breathed. Then he said, he was in the woods while she was running. I think that's when the real doubt started. Not toward Jack, but toward the way the investigation had been handled. Why hadn't that original tip been taken seriously? Why had they focused so narrowly? I talked to one of the deputies over coffee. He said off the record, "We thought we had our guy. When you think you know, you stop looking sideways." That stayed with me. Not because it was cruel, because it was true, but it was hard to undo what had already hardened. By now, Amy's case had gone national. Datelines, segments, podcasts. They all circled the same drain. Did the husband do it? Very few mentioned Dale. Fewer mentioned that his own brother had tried to warn them. Jack tried to meet with investigators after the Moneta search, asked if he could look through the items they found, see if anything belonged to Amy. They said no, said it wasn't his place. He'd stopped talking to Amy's family by then. Not out of anger, just distance. Sometimes silence grows so wide, there's no way back across. And even though Dale was now behind bars, nothing connected him to Amy. No photo, no trace, nothing physical to tie her name to his. It was all in the margins, time, place, opportunity. Tyler believed it, said Dale had probably been camping near the trailhead. That maybe Amy startled him, or maybe she didn't. Maybe it was planned. Maybe it was random. Either way, no one had looked for him until it was too late. We didn't say it out loud, but I think we both knew if he was the one who took her, we might never get her back. Not her body, not the truth, not the ending we hoped for. And yet, even then, pieces were still moving, quietly in the background. A ranger spotted something in the foothills. Not big, not certain, but just enough to make someone pause. A flash of metal tucked in moss. A band, maybe a clasp. Something small enough to miss if you weren't paying attention. Something that might have belonged to a runner, or might have meant nothing at all. It was June of 2003 when the call came in. A hiking couple from out near the Middle Fork Trail had reported something odd. They didn't think much of it at first, just a bit of metal partly wedged between rock and runoff. It looked like a woman's wristwatch. Nothing fancy. Plastic strap light gray, half sunk in silt. But the detail that caught the ranger's attention was the time it had stopped at 2:46. Amy's last confirmed sighting had been around 2:30 p.m. on the day she vanished. And the description of her watch-thin band white-faced jogger's model matched. That was enough to send a deputy out the next morning. He brought it back wrapped in a cloth still damp. Tyler drove straight from Powell to look at it himself. He held it in his hand for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "She wore it on her left." The buckle would have lined up just like this. They searched the area again, slow and methodical, but they didn't find much, just a few bone fragments nearby that turned out to be from a mule deer. Nothing else. No shoes, no clothing, no trace that Amy had ever passed through that stretch of trail. The watch went to the lab, but there wasn't enough biological material left to test. The elements had taken too much. Officially, it was logged as unconfirmed a possible match, but not evidence. Still, it was the first thing in years that didn't feel like smoke. Tyler kept the photos in a manila envelope tucked in the same box as the old search maps and the flyer he'd printed himself with the words, "We are still looking." I remember that summer more for what didn't happen than what did. There were no arrests, no press conferences, no new suspects. Just that watch sitting in an evidence drawer and 100 private thoughts looping through the people who'd once known her. I walked the first 3 miles of the loop road one morning, retracing what might have been her last run. The ground was uneven gravel, loose patches, shaded spots, where the trees thinned and sun broke through in narrow columns. I tried to picture her there, her gait, the steady breath, how she'd check her odometer, glance at her list, make mental notes for the race course. She would have been thinking about logistics, water stations, where to put the turnaround marker. Not danger, not that. And then there was something else. Something in that list. Tyler had shown it to me once, the original sheet from the car, the one left beside her keys. It had 13 items, 4 checked off. One of them simply read, "Loop mileposts." That was Amy. Organized, efficient. She'd written little numbers in the margin, 2.3, 2.8, 3.0, probably odometer readings. At first, it seemed like a planner's detail. But the more we stared at it, the more we realized she'd mapped those distances exactly where her car had to have been parked. She hadn't just gone for a run. She was measuring, testing, laying out a course. That meant she'd made it to the trailhead on purpose. She wasn't abducted somewhere else and dropped there. She arrived of her own will, stepped out of her car, and started her run. That shifted something. The question wasn't just what happened anymore. It became when, because now we knew she got to Burnt Gulch. That wasn't theory, it was fact. And if she got there, then someone else did too. Maybe someone already waiting. Or maybe someone who arrived just a little later. A local mechanic, Bill Kassler, came forward with something he hadn't thought much about until the watch story made the rounds. He remembered seeing a jogger on the switchbacks that afternoon, sometime between 3:30 and 3:30. Said it struck him because it was hot, unusually hot for that altitude. The runner had been quick, lean build ponytail. Said she waved. He didn't think much of it. Just someone training, probably local. The sighting hadn't made it into his mind until that photo of the watch was printed in the paper. Then it clicked. He called the sheriff's office. 2 days later, another couple came forward. Jim and Wendy Gilbert. They ran a small lodge north of town. They remembered driving up toward the lake that same afternoon and passing a woman jogging on the incline. Black shorts, pale shirt, moved like she'd done the road 100 times. They hadn't known her name, but when shown the photo of Amy, Wendy said yes. That's her. It didn't prove anything concrete, not in the legal sense, but it narrowed the window. Amy had made it onto the trail. She was seen. She was running. The direction fit the list, the pace, the time of day. All of it tracked. What still didn't make sense was the wallet. That nylon green one, the one Tyler said she never ran with. It had been gone from the car, never found. Her sunglasses were there, though, neatly folded. That detail stuck with me. Sunglasses taken off carefully, not dropped in a rush or in fear. Left beside the keys, like she expected to be back soon, like she had a plan. Tyler kept circling back to that. Not the sunglasses themselves, but the placement. She wouldn't have left them if she was getting in someone's vehicle, wouldn't have walked away from them if she was being followed. They were placed with intention, which meant whatever happened, it came after she believed she was still in control. There was one last detail, one that didn't make the papers. A staffer at the county clerk's office, Sarah Lund, came forward years later after she'd retired. She said a man had come in the week before Amy disappeared, asked about land out near Burnt Gulch. Said he was camping, wanted to know who owned which parcels where public turned private. She hadn't thought anything of it. People asked about that all the time. But when the name Dale Eaton came up again years later, she remembered. He was quiet, polite, but his questions were specific, focused. Like he already knew the land and just wanted to know who might show up. Sarah said no one followed up on her statement, said she didn't push it because by then everyone had moved on. But she remembered his eyes, how they didn't match the rest of his face, how he smiled with his mouth but not anywhere else. Tyler and I sat on his porch that fall. He had the map spread out again, the one with the red circles and the black arrows. He traced a finger along the edge of the loop road where the milepost numbers curved in her handwriting. He said, "She was there. We know that now. We just don't know who else was." The wind picked up, then rustling the corners of the old flyer still pinned to the railing. I looked out toward the ridge and wondered how many other things had been left just outside our view. Things that weren't marked or written down or ever reported. Things that didn't look like clues until years later when it was already too late to chase them. It was in the winter of 2010, almost 13 years after Amy vanished, that the case was reassigned to a man named Walt Zerga. He was a sergeant out of Wynn County, the kind who didn't rush a sentence or pretend to know what he didn't. Word was he'd worked wilderness cases before slow-layered things that took patience, and he had that. A quiet, steady way of going back through files without assuming the first version was the right one. He came to Silver Hollow on a Tuesday unannounced and sat down with Tyler in the back booth of the cafe across from the old courthouse. Tyler called me after, said it was the first time in years he felt like someone had actually listened without steering the conversation back to Jack. Zerga took the files home that night, read through everything: interviews, logs, field reports, those strange early tips nobody had followed. And one kept coming back to him. The call from Dale Eaton's brother. The one that said Dale had been camping in the area in July of '97, just days before Amy disappeared. The report was only a paragraph long, no follow-up, no interview. Just a single sheet clipped to the back of the old tip log marked "No action motivation unclear." So Zerga pulled Dale's file. And when he did, he found a long list of things that had nothing to do with Amy, but everything to do with the kind of man Dale Eaton had been. The failed abduction in the Red Desert, the parole violation outside Dubois, the jailhouse murder in '98. And then, what made him stop reading altogether the match to the Lisa Kimmel case? The girl who'd gone missing in '88, whose body turned up weeks later, but whose car was never found, until they dug it up on Dale's property, along with her clothes, her purse, and a pile of newspaper clippings about women who'd gone missing between 1983 and 1997. That next week, Zerga drove down to the state archives in Cheyenne, sat at a microfilm machine for 3 hours, scrolling through obituaries, case summaries, weather reports. Then he called Tyler and said, "I need to talk to Dale's brother." So Tyler dug out the old folder again, tattered now, corners soft, from use, and found the name Richard Eaton. He was living down in Rock Springs, worked maintenance at a truck yard, the kind of man who didn't speak unless he had to. Zerga made the drive that Friday. Sat with Richard for almost 2 hours in a room behind the shop door, open to the smell of diesel and brake fluid. He didn't record it. Said later, that wouldn't have worked. Richard didn't trust tape, but what he told him matched the original tip only with more clarity now. He said Dale had been camping near Burnt Gulch that summer alone, but close enough to the trail system that you'd see the odd hiker pass by. He said Dale knew those woods better than anyone. Fished there, hunted there, liked it quiet, and Richard remembered thinking something felt off when he visited that July. Said Dale had that look again. No elaboration, just those words. Back in Silver Hollow, we heard about the meeting in pieces. Tyler said Zerga kept his voice even the whole time, didn't promise anything, just asked for details. But when he left, he told Tyler he believed Dale had been there. That much he was sure of. The next step was harder. Zerga filed a formal request to interview Dale in person, now housed on death row for the Kimmel case. He didn't expect cooperation, but he went anyway. Took a long drive to Rawlins that fall. Said the road was clear, just a little wind rolling off the bluffs. He brought the folder with him, the one with Amy's name at the top. The same photo we'd all seen 100 times, Amy at a racehair pulled-back stopwatch in hand. He waited 2 hours in the holding room before they brought Dale out. Hands, cuffed face, dull. Zerga said he opened with her name. Just her name. Amy Halterman. Said Dale looked at the photo, blinked once, then smiled, but not the kind that reached the eyes. He didn't say a word, not in response to the name, not when asked where he'd been, not when shown the map with the trail markers. Just sat there, looking amused. Finally, Zerga said, "If you know something that could help her family, now's the time." Dale leaned forward and said, "You think I'm here to help anybody?" Then he stood turned to the guard and said he was done. That was it. When the report came through, there was nothing actionable. No confession, no timeline, just a man who enjoyed holding power over what people didn't know. Dale had nothing to lose, no incentive, and he'd kept his secret this long. After that visit, something shifted in Tyler again. Not anger, not even hope, just a kind of deep, hollow certainty. The feeling you get when you've been walking toward a door for years and realize it's made of stone. He stopped calling as often, stopped sending follow-ups to the cold case unit, said he needed to sit with it a while. But Zerga wasn't finished. He began pulling old aerial maps overlaying weather records and checking known vehicle tracks from that week in '97. He marked out points on a digital grid where Dale could have parked camped, moved without being seen. And then he found something that made him pause. An old trail off a forest road long closed to vehicles. No signage, no gate, just a slight dip in the trees. A place most people wouldn't know about. It was within a half-mile of where the watch had turned up. Within range of 2 separate sightings of Amy, too. It wasn't a destination, there was nothing to see there. But it was a place to wait. And from there, you could see runners come and go. That December, a small team went out quietly. No press, no tape, just boots on the ground and a metal detector. They found nothing. Just rusted cans, an old fire ring, some cigarette butts too degraded to test. But what they didn't find spoke loudest. No trace of Amy, no drag marks, no sign of disturbance. Like someone had moved through quickly and left before leaving anything behind. Zerga filed one more request to speak with Dale. This time, it was denied. The warden said Dale had become increasingly hostile to outside interviews. no longer participated in programming, refused visitors. His health was deteriorating, they said. Wouldn't be long. When Tyler heard that, he just nodded. Said if he knew something, he's taking it with him. And that was the part we couldn't change. Even with all the files and maps and careful questions, we couldn't make someone talk who didn't want to. We couldn't force a memory into evidence. We couldn't pull a truth from someone who'd buried it deeper than the woods themselves. But we could still ask. And that's what Zerga kept doing. Even when no one else believed it would matter. Even when the trail was so faint, it barely showed up on the page. It was spring again by the time Zerga heard back from the prison board. Dale Eaton had refused another interview. His health was in steep decline, and there was talk that his legal team had filed for a change in his sentence death to life based on new mitigation. It made people uneasy, especially those of us who remembered how he'd sat in that room and smirked when Amy's name was spoken. Zerga filed his objection anyway, but it wouldn't matter. The state didn't want to fight another round of appeals. And just like that, the man who may have taken Amy's life would never face execution. Tyler didn't say much about it, just nodded and said, "I guess that's that." But we both knew it wasn't. Not really. Amy was still missing, and Dale, if he had something to tell, wasn't going to speak now. Not for us. Not for her. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with Tyler that June. He pulled out the file again, Amy's folder. Still used the same manila envelope, still tucked the watch photos inside. He had something new, though. A list of all the items recovered from Dale's property back in '99. Most had been cataloged during the Kimmel investigation. Women's shoes, old license plates, newspaper clippings. But one entry stood out. A canvas satchel, faded green. Tyler leaned in and said Amy had one just like this. She used it for gear flyers, her race map stopwatch. He'd asked the bureau if he could look at it. They said no. Said the chain of custody had already been closed for that case. The evidence was sealed. Jack had tried the same years earlier. Denied then, too. It was hard not to wonder if anything inside that bag might have once belonged to her. But unless Dale talked, or new evidence surfaced, there was no legal path to open it again. Around that time, I started getting letters from old friends who'd moved away. People who remembered Amy from school, from the races, from town picnics. Most hadn't heard much about the case in years. They were surprised to learn it was still open. One of them, a teacher who now lived in Oregon, said she'd shown her students a profile on unsolved missing persons, and Amy's photo had popped up. "She looks so alive in it," the letter read, "like she's about to move." And that was the thing. In all those pictures running, coaching, laughing, Amy never looked paused. She was always in motion. That's what made the silence afterwards so brutal. Not just the absence, but how unnatural it felt. The town had long since stopped talking about Jack. He still lived nearby, though quieter now. He'd remarried, had children, opened a climbing gym just outside of town. I'd see him occasionally at the store or driving with the windows down in the early evening. He always nodded polite steady, but never said much. When reporters called asking if he'd ever do another interview, he told them no. The last one he'd given was in 2016, and in it he said, "I don't think I'll ever understand what happened, but I have to keep living in the space where the not knowing lives." Some people thought that meant guilt. Others thought it meant grief. I think it meant both. Zerga retired in late 2021. Before he left, he gave Tyler a small envelope. Inside was a copy of a map topographic with a series of red X's and blue circles. He'd marked every confirmed sighting of Amy that day. Every ranger trail intersected. Every potential place someone like Dale could have pulled off without being seen. And in the bottom margin, he'd written one sentence: if he took her, he didn't take her far. Tyler framed it, not as closure, but as fact. Something to hold on to when the rest of it frayed. Then in early 2023, the news broke that Dale's sentence had been officially commuted to life. The last appeal had gone through. He would die in prison, but not by execution. Some of the families affected by his crimes held a press conference. Others stayed silent. We watched from home. Tyler didn't say anything until the end. Then he stood, went to the bookshelf, and pulled down one of Amy's old race plaques. Set it on the table beside his keys and said, he never said her name. Not once. And that was true. Through all the interviews, all the requests, all the efforts to link him to the day she vanished, Dale never once acknowledged her, never denied, never confirmed, just smirked, or stayed quiet, or turned his back. But there was one more thing, one final note in the file. A record of a woman who came forward after Dale's sentencing was changed. She hadn't spoken in years. Said she didn't want the attention. But in 1997, she'd been camping at a nearby trailhead about 3 miles north of Burnt Gulch. She remembered seeing a blue pickup truck driving fast through the trees. Said there was a blonde woman in the passenger seat. Looked upset. She didn't report it then. Thought it might have just been a couple arguing. But after hearing Dale's sentence had been changed, something in her stirred. The vehicle matched one Dale had owned, same model, same paint. And the woman, maybe Amy. Maybe not. There was no way to know. But it reminded me, reminded all of us, that what happened to Amy wasn't just a mystery. It was a pattern. A silence repeated over time. The kind of silence that someone like Dale counted on. The kind that made a person vanish not just from the world, but from the record. And still somewhere out there, something had to remain. Something he couldn't bury. Something that hadn't been found yet. Tyler said it best that evening as we sat outside looking toward the ridge where the sun was setting low behind the trees. She left a trail, he said. He just learned how to cover it. But not forever. Not completely. Not if we kept looking. The story should have ended by now. That's what people said even if they didn't say it out loud. It had been over 2 decades since Amy disappeared. And the edges of her story had begun to blur file cabinets closing tip lines going quiet. The old bulletin board near the post office cleared for summer rec flyers and lost dog notices. But Tyler still carried her with him in the quiet ways that didn't fade. Her race medal sat under a glass dome on his bookshelf, not because it needed display, but because it was something real, something untouched. We'd both seen too many families lose that photos lost to mildew voicemails, overwritten key dates, forgotten, except by strangers who stumble across a name on a podcast years later. Amy never became a headline again, but she also never disappeared from the rooms where her absence mattered. The reward fund had closed down by 2015. The original hotline number was disconnected not long after. Jack had stopped granting interviews, and most of the press had moved on to newer cases. But every once in a while, someone would bring her up, usually at the edge of a conversation, like a stone turned over too long in the hand. It might be a forest ranger who still remembered seeing her on a trail once. Or someone who'd taught at the high school and still caught themselves expecting to see her name on a list of alumni sponsors. Even in silence, there were places where Amy's name still had weight. What we didn't expect came quietly. In 2023, not long after Dale's sentence was commuted, a staffer from the prison hospital filed a notice that slipped into public record. It wasn't detailed, but it included a medical form noting that Dale had been moved to palliative care. Stage 4. Cancer. No family listed. No visitors requested. No final statement offered. He was dying the same way he'd lived, tight-lipped, clenched, and uncooperative. A man who knew more than he said and would take all of it with him unless someone found a reason for him not to. Zerga had retired, but the cold case division still maintained a shadow file. Tyler sent them a request formal, handwritten like always asking for a final visit with Dale. It wasn't approved. He wasn't family, and Dale had refused contact from anyone linked to Amy's case. Tyler accepted it the way he always had, quietly, methodically. He pulled out the map again, the same one marked up over years with sightings and guesses and edges of trails that no longer existed. We sat with it on my kitchen table one afternoon, while the rain came down slow and even against the windows. He tapped the pen against the section near the old fire road. You know, he said, if I were him, I wouldn't have gone far. And maybe that's what kept haunting us. Not just the absence of evidence, but the way the terrain around Burnt Gulch seemed to conspire against being known. You could stand there right where her car had been found and turn slowly and see only woods. No sounds, no landmarks, just a stillness so deep it felt unnatural. And yet, in all that quiet, someone had moved. Someone had taken Amy out of view in a way that defied explanation. In October of that year, a young ranger, new to the district, unfamiliar with the case, logged an unusual note during a survey hike. He'd come across a spot where the undergrowth had been disturbed, but not recently. Something had collapsed. Maybe a root system or an animal den. He noted it, flagged it, and sent in a soil sample because it was procedure. When it came back, it didn't show much. Just decay and cedar. But in the corner of the flagged area, someone noticed a scrap of fabric nylon sun-bleached torn along one edge. It had no identifying marks, no tags, no traceable material. But Tyler was shown a photograph. He recognized the weave. Back in the late 90s, Amy had a specific type of training vest she wore on trail runs. Not the modern kind with water bladders and zippers, but older, simple mesh front clips, 2 small pouches. She'd bought it used, stitched the seam herself. Looked like a fishing vest, Tyler said. But it breathed better. He still had a photo of her in it, from the year before she vanished. We compared it to the fabric sample. Couldn't prove anything. Couldn't disprove it either. The rangers cleared the area, dug, gently sifted down into the disturbed layers. Nothing else surfaced. No bones, no buttons, no watch. Just that sliver of material and a damp stillness no one could explain. There were no arrests after that. No warrants, no press releases. Nothing made the 6 o'clock news, but the evidence log grew by 1. A bagged item with the code potential match Halterman case. It was more than they'd added in years. That winter, I drove out to the old trailhead by myself. The road was clear but soft under the tires. The same gravel lot, the same warped trail marker. I stood where her car had once been parked, where the to-do list sat on the passenger seat, where the keys rested beside her sunglasses. Nothing about it had changed. I walked a little ways and just enough to hear the forest pull in around me. The snow was patchy, wind in the branches. The kind of cold that settles behind your ribs, slow and dull. I didn't say anything, just listened. Because even now, all these years later, the hardest part hasn't been the grief. It's been the knowing that she made it to the trail, that she ran it, that she had a plan, a list, a purpose. And then someone else showed up. Not a ghost, not a shadow. A man with a truck and a secret and the knowledge of where to park without being seen. A man who watched, who waited, who knew how to make someone vanish in a place where sound doesn't carry and no one asks questions until it's too late. And somehow, he still managed to leave behind just enough, one torn strap, one sighting, one watch. Enough to remind us that Amy didn't disappear. She was taken. She was there. She was running. And someone somewhere still knows exactly what happened. Somewhere in the Wind River Range, there's still a silence that carries her name. Amy Halterman never came home, but she never left us either. Not really, not in the ways that matter. Her picture still hangs near the doorway of the old rec center, just above the corkboard where local races and hiking maps are pinned. New faces walk past it now, kids who don't know the story. But sometimes they pause, look up, and ask. And someone always answers. Jack still lives on the edge of town. We don't talk much, but every few years, our paths cross. Once at the feed store, we nodded the same way you'd nod to someone who knows something unspoken. He's older now. So are we all. He built a life again. Had to. The world doesn't stop just because the past didn't finish right. I don't know what he carries with him at night, but I know he never left. That means something, I think. Tyler doesn't search anymore, not in the same way. The flyers are gone. The maps are boxed. But the fire never really left him. He speaks less often about what happened, but when he does, there's no anger left in it. Just clarity. He said to me once, "There are things you never get back, but that doesn't mean they disappear." He keeps Amy's running shoes on a shelf above his workbench, laced worn, not dusty. He wipes them off every spring. The investigators moved on one by one. Walt Zerga's file notes ended with a sentence that stuck with me. It read, "She entered the woods with purpose, and someone else interrupted it." That line circled in red in Tyler's copy, not because it solved anything, but because it said enough. Dale Eaton died 2 months after his last appeal was closed. No confession. No apology. No closure. Some people thought his silence meant guilt. Some thought it was just cruelty. I think it was control. He took things he didn't earn and never gave them back. Not to the families, not to the courts, not to Amy. We don't expect miracles now. That part faded years ago. But what we do expect, what we ask, is that people remember her as more than a headline. Amy wasn't a ghost or a symbol. She was a runner, a coach, a daughter who called home every Sunday, a wife who packed Jack's gear with care and organized community events with color-coded charts. She had plans. She had places to be. And then someone took that away. And yet even now the story doesn't end with him. It ends with us, with what we choose to hold on to, with what we still speak aloud, with how we protect the memory of someone who deserved better. Amy's name isn't whispered in this town. It's spoken plainly, not just as a loss, but as a person, a life. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it so no name like hers gets left behind in the silence.